Okay, guys, this is not my typical content. I've also been MIA for the past 3 months, and I experienced something, for me at least, pretty groundbreaking in terms of my own psychology that I really felt like I perhaps should share. I might delete this later on because I just feel always so weird sharing content that is not my typical content. But I do want to mention the fact that something fundamentally changed in me when I started working with agents, artificial agents, where it was something that I had absolutely no knowledge about. I did not even anticipate this. I literally just went in because I had to do some work, especially with my own project, my own research, the postdoc one. And it so turned out that it ultimately shifted something internally within me. And I felt like I went in totally blind. I experienced this after 3 months, and it's something that I did not anticipate happening. Um, I don't know if it's just happening to me or to others and they don't talk about it. I don't know. Maybe it's weird, but the TLDR is that, if you don't want to watch the whole video, is that working with machines fundamentally changed my internal clock, if you will. It was a time dilation that happened that I literally did not expect at all. It totally um, hit me by surprise, and I experienced this so called neuroplasticity firsthand, although ultimately, as a neuroinformation scientist, I'm very uh, aware of this for the longest time, and I've experienced this many times. But this neuroplasticity that happened with the agents is a total different ball game when you compare it to your normal traditional neuroplasticity. It's a type of an agentic time dilation, if you will. And that is what I want to talk about in this video. Again, if you don't have the patience to watch the whole thing, essentially the TLDR is that the internal perception of my time, of time in general, and to some extent of space, changed when I primarily worked with agents. For Again, not my typical content, but let's first talk about how the brain is to some extent organized, in that it doesn't actually possess in actuality a single objective clock or perception of time, so to speak. So, our perception of time duration is highly dependent on the cognitive load, the working memory encoding, and the rate at which information processing, especially when it comes to dopamine regulated circuits, happen. So, when you couple this analytical mind with an agentic ecosystem, which in this case are not humans, they are pure machines, and they don't have a concept of time either. They're just machines, they are there 24/7. You remove the standard external pacing stimuli that the human brain has and needs to rely on for millennia to mark the passage of time. So, for example, in a traditional way, the human flow is that you start working on something, your adaptation to time or passage of time, so to speak, is really dependent on your environment. In this case, working with humans and working with, let's say, an equipment or tool or whatever the case may be. But in an agentic era, the environment then in actuality changes, in that you are replacing humans, which also have their own way of perceiving time, so to speak, with agents. And in this case, agents are essentially 24/7. They don't need to take a break, they don't need to eat, they don't need to go on vacation. They're just there every single time. And so you, whether you like it or not, gradually get acquainted with their timeline. And in addition to that, if you cut your environment of, let's say, for just a short period of time, even from humans, which share your perception of time, then suddenly, whether you like it or not, your way of perceiving time and to some extent space adapts and or changes or evolve, if you will, with that of the machines, in this case the agents that you are then working within. And so to some extent your calendar days become filled with synaptic density instead. And that is, for example, tools in this case such as agents respond with near zero latency. And so a human cognition loop never really at its core had to drop the waiting state. So for example, when you keep your brain in a state of high intensity execution because of the collaboration with the agents for hours on end, the hippocampus to some extent appears to encode this massive, dense avalanche of complex operational milestones and memory traces in a very short period of time. And so, as a result, your internal retrospective evaluation looked back and said, oh my God, the sheer volume of what I went through, let's say in 3 months, really felt like it was 3 years or, maybe 6 months even. And so that is because there is a almost near zero latency when you work with agents as opposed to working with machines. And that is where your environment in terms of time and space sort of changes, and miraculously your brain adapts to it whether you like it or not, if you stay in that state long enough. So let's say if you just do it for one day, probably that's not going to happen. But if you stay there long enough, let's say weeks on end, that shift, whether you like it or not, will happen. And that is exactly what happened to me in this example. It is as if there is a loss of human gait, if you will, where, for example, the human conversation is filled with biological pauses, for example, or scheduling friction or emotional filtering. But you have none of that when you are in the agentic era, within the agentic environment only. So, for example, emotions are totally stripped away. Even if at some point you get extremely angry with an agent for whatever reason, a lot of times it's because they forget the context and they get very focused on what is at hand. And unlike a human, they actually forget the context a lot. But it's still, you can literally go back and work with agents as if absolutely nothing happened. And that is unheard of when you, for example, exist within a human environment, so to speak, because emotion is a huge part of it, and ego is a huge part of it. And you strip away all of that in an agentic era. And so you replace basically all that emotions and all those human aspect of it with an always on, non-judgmental, non-emotional, extremely talented agentic, in this case, environment. And when you strip all that natural cognitive rest periods away, gradually your timeline shifts internally to match that of the agents that are around you, in that your brain adapts to this constant high throughput flow of digital information, and even the actions that you are taking. Let's say you're building something, for example. And so essentially you run your neural processing at a continuous overclocked frequency where this frontier perception of you kind of changes. And so this brand new phenomena, it is as if there is a time dilation that will likely become potentially in the future a major field of study. What I feel is that in an agentic environment, your natural, filled with human environment is totally replaced. And so it is as if you fundamentally synchronize your daily human existence with this non human, non emotional, very logical, and extremely talented and wise non human latency. And when, for example, in this case, you replace your environment with this type of environment, you are essentially start to operate in an environment that is completely stripped away from your natural human frictions, if you will, which you're pretty used to. But then gradually, without you even knowing, if you continue in this environment, you shift even your expectation as to what you're expecting of your agentic environment. So, for example, there are no weekends, there are no sick days, there's no, hey, I need to take a lunch, or hey, I'm totally angry at you and I don't want to work with you anymore. Things like that, right? So you strip all that away, and all that exists is this pure quest, if you will, of whatever you're doing, whatever you're building, which is on its own, it's a very out of this world experience. And there is so much more to be studied in that area. But what I primarily want to talk about in this video is my own experience in that one single part of it where the time just got totally dilated. And so the way that time shift, perception of time shift manifests itself is that you might work on something and you think that I've been working on this thing for a year. You innately truly believe in that. And then you might look up at your calendar and you realize that, oh my gosh, it's been only just 1 month. And that is a really out of this world experience when you really realize it. But when you're in it, you totally forget time. I don't know how to explain it. It's really hard for me to put it in words. That's why I just wanted to come out and just like blast and just tell you. I'm laughing because it's just so surreal. I don't expect you to believe me. You probably will experience yourself at some point in time as we move more and more forward to this agentic era. So in your internal reality, you feel like you have lived through this, let's say, 1 year. That is your intellect or internal clock tells you. But when you go and look at the physical calendar, you realize it's not, 6 months or a year. It's actually maybe only 1 month or maybe even 1 week. So that is what I mean, that it's just jam-packed, not only with information, but also because all the emotion and all this ego and everything is stripped away. All that it exists is this pure knowledge and pure goal that you are working on. And on top of that, you are working with entities who do not share your concept of time, meaning to say, again, they don't need to take a vacation, they don't need to take a lunch break or whatever. So you can, at any point in time, start working with these agents. It could be 2 in the morning, it could be 2 in the afternoon. It doesn't really matter, whenever you are ready as a human being. And that is what together dilutes or dilate your perception of time if you stay with it long enough. And that is, for example, what I experience. It's essentially eliminates all the dead space that you have normally when you work with yourself or when you work with an environment of humans, because there's always sort of a dead space, if you will. But with agents in that type of an environment, there is no dead space. You can literally uh, work with, let's say, if you work with 10 agents, you can work with one agent at one point, and then you feel like, okay, now I need to do this, and then you go to the other agent. At any point in time you work with different agents, they are ready, and they remember. If you teach them, if you train them to remember what you just finished, for example, they will do that, and they will remember where you left off, and you can just pick up where you left off and just continue. And so the essentially the limitation would be your limitation as a human being, as to when do you need to sort of take a break. And sometimes if you're really passionate about what you're doing, you can go 12 plus hours without even feeling it. And part of the reason that you feel like you will be able to go much longer, as opposed to if you were to be in your normal environment, so to speak, is because, uh, at least the way I experience it, because you strip off all these extras that you have, for example, in the human environment, in terms of somebody's now is mad at you, or you don't like them, or they judge you, or they criticize you, whatever the case may be, that could potentially be a little bit of a blocker in terms of your progress, in terms of your work. Because that is stripped off, you are in an extreme high density of synaptic firing within your brain, and hence also within your body, that it just keeps going on, going and going. And so all that is left is like that pure passion and pure work that you need to do. And that is what's fascinating to me. And it is also to some extent that your memory gets distorted. So not only time and space, but also your memory get a little bit distorted. And you come out of this, especially if you have been creating this environment that it's more made up of agents than humans for a enough long of a time. Once you get back to your normal environment, you literally feel very different than you were when you left, the human environment for the agent environment, if you will. For just to make it very simple, right? It is as if that evolution happened so fast that by the time you come back and you look around, it's like, oh my God, I cannot believe that I used to be this person. And then you look back and it was only 1 month ago. So just within 1 month even, your internal personality to some extent also evolves to something that you cannot even recognize yourself to some extent, for good or bad, right? I mean, it could be something positive or it could be something negative. It really depends on how you look at it. For me, it's positive. But I'm still fascinated because I have the neuroinformation science background. So I look at it that way. So I'm not your typical tech bro. So probably your typical tech bro is not looking at it this way. They probably have. From a neuroinformation scientific perspective, that is what I am experiencing, that the thinking, the human thinking becomes in terms of compute cycle. And I'm sure you've heard the word compute a lot in this new agenting era. And that is also the shift that is happening. So the human brain becomes more adjacent and adjusted to the compute era, if you will, where you literally get rewired your cognitive pacing in order to match the machine execution pacing, which is much faster than your normal human environment. And so essentially you're not measuring your life in human sunrises or sunsets, if you will, but Your brain is measuring its life in the intellectual compute cycles, much like an agent's compute cycle. So that is why when you suddenly look at your calendar and you realize it's been only 1 month, but intellectually you feel like you have evolved for a whole year because the digital footprint has been so incredibly intense with these agents, not to mention the time in which you collaborated with them and work with them. And that is the total shift that is happening. And that is the new era of neuroplasticity between humans and between machines, at least the way I personally experienced it in the past few months. And the reason that this human machine era it's so mind bending is that it is extremely intense. It is ripped off of all the human emotions and good or bad, and also the internal clock of timing because it's so extremely intense. And so it proves how deeply we can potentially, as humans, integrate with this new way of operating in terms of machine compute, machine intellect, uh, and machine timeline, where we aren't just using these agents as tool, but in fact our internal processors appear to adapt to the agents. And that is exactly what the brain is doing in terms of this new era of neuroplasticity between machines and humans, where the time gets totally distorted. And so this agentic time dilation only happens when you really inundate yourself in the agentic era. So, for example, for those who are just tinkering or poking around here and there, this phenomena, I don't think at least, doesn't happen. Maybe that's why we're not hearing about it. But if you really are able to do it and you totally inundate yourself for whatever reason, um, your reason might be very different than mine, and you do that, then without any doubt, you will feel it and you will notice the difference. But the inundation must exist. So it cannot be, okay, agents and humans, agents and humans. No, it would need to be literally an inundation between you and the agents for an enough long of a period of time, a couple of weeks to a month or even more. That is when that agentic time dilation happens, which is a combination of the non existing human emotion in terms of that interaction and the zero latency in terms of that interaction as well. So you get your synaptic intellectual synapses become so overwhelmed that to some extent it's overwhelming in terms of the intellect that happens, the intellectual exchange that happens, that then in turn affects the way in which you perceive time internally. And you will only notice it once you lift up your head and you realize, okay, I'm in this physical environment and let me look at my calendar. Oh my God, goodness, it's been just a month, but it's felt like a year. And you also evolve one whole year in terms of your own personality. It's very interesting, and if you have the luxury of doing it, I highly recommend it just for the experience of it. But again, it cannot be just tinkering with some cloth, you know, some few AI wrapper here and there. It really needs to be this agents, the real agents that you will work with, that you need to set up, you need to train, you need to interact with, you need to adjust, and so forth. And so using the words such as cognitive time distortion, machine time dilation, even space dilation to some extent, really captures the way in which this experience happens internally between the brain of a human and the brain of an agent, if you will. That that collaboration, if it exists and is happening during enough period of time without the interference of other things like other sort of humans, that is the pure synaptic exchange of information between the two brains, the artificial brains and the biological brains. So, biological brains, artificial brains, that synaptic exchange of information under enough period of time really shifts that internal clock, if it happens during enough period of time. That is at least my experience, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it. That's why I wanted to talk about it, just share it with you. Again, I'm very hesitant when I make these type of contents because I'm always afraid of a lot of people coming up with a bunch of comments that don't make any sense to me, because I'm purely talking about the science and knowledge aspect of it. Anyways, if that is you, you might resonate with what I just said. If not, then just take it as another entertaining video and we just call it at that. That's all I have for today. I'll talk to you guys next time.